In the world of professional cycling, there certainly are riders that possess an air of mystique and their abilities transcending statistics and even race results. Thibaut Pinot, a name that resonates in the echelons of this sport, is one such enigma. With a career marked by glimpses of brilliance and tantalizing potential, Thibaut Pinot's story is both inspiring and tinged with a hint of unfilled promise. In this video, we're gonna delve into the highs and lows of Thibaut Pinot's career and ask ourselves, how good was Thibaut Pinot really? The story begins in 1990 in Le, France, on the 29th of May, where Thibaut Pinot was born. Early on, his passion for cycling began, fostered by the picturesque landscape of the Vosges region. Pinot's talent quickly became evident, catching the eye of local coaches and mentors who recognized his potential as a climber, especially when he won the Giro di Valdadosta. And in 2010, Pinot made his professional debut with the Francis de Jeux team, and it didn't take long for him to make his mark, as he finished 5th in the Tour de Finestre and even won the mountain classification in his first Tour of Romandy. And bear in mind, he was only 20 years old, and he even displayed his phenomenal climbing in the Criterium du Dauphiné, where he managed to finish 20th overall. This early success hinted at the promise of Pinot, and he was held in high regard by Marc Mario, the team manager. In 2011, his second year with the team, Pinot was prevalent at the Tour of Turkey, and he managed to secure his first podium. And later, he was even strong in the Dauphiné once again, with 3 top 10 finishes and even second on the final stage, just missing out the victory to Joaquim Rodriguez. Clearly in good form, Pinot continued to impress by winning the Tourals overall, and at the Tour de l'Ain that year he managed to win his first professional victory in a very elite selection on the mythical Grand Colombia, and he didn't stop there, as he managed to win once again on stage 5, this time out sprinting David Moncoutier. Later that month, Pinot had more success as he sprinted to the opening stage victory at the Settimana Ciclisme Lombardia and took over the race lead, which he managed to hold all the way to the finish, and thereby got his first overall stage win on the senior level. For the 2012 season, he had a slow build-up with some results in the Tour de Romandy, where he finished 8th on the final time trial and 11th overall, and in the Tour de Suisse he managed to finish 5th on stage 2, finishing off the Verbier. The following month he took part in his first Tour de France to gain some experience, and thereby Thibaut Pinot became the youngest participant of that year's Tour de France. But Pinot was not just there for participating, he was also there to prove himself, and it came on stage 8, where he managed to get away with Tony Galopin before he went on to drop his fellow Frenchman and solo to the finish, winning the stage, much to Marc Mario's delight, and a French superstar was born. Pinot even managed to come in second on stage 11, another mountainous stage, managing to beat Chris Froome to the line. And that year, overall, Thibaut Pinot secured a 10th place in the GC and became the youngest rider to finish in the top 10 since 1947. In 2013, Pinot's season began at the GP Marseille before he went to the Volta a Catalunya, where he finished 8th overall, and before the tour he went to the Tour de Suisse once again and was 3rd on the first mountain stage, moving up to 5th in the general classification. However, on the final mountain stage he could not follow the wheel of Rui Costa, Bauke Mollema and TJ Van Garderen, and ended up finishing 4th. At the Tour de France with the Grand Depart in Corsica, Pinot was the leader for the team. However, he did lose 42 seconds following FDJ's 5th place in the team time trial, and during his first Pyrenean mountain stage, Pinot was left behind on the descent, and Pinot conceded 6 minutes to the leader Chris Froome at the finish. And the next day he was left behind and finished in the gruppetto 25 minutes down, and Pinot decided after the second rest day to withdraw from the race. Pinot thereafter went to the Vuelta a España, where he showed himself and finished 7th in a strong performance. 2014 was a tough start for Pinot, as he had to abandon the Tour of Oman and even Tirreno Adriatico due to tendinitis, and in the springtime he showed his form was coming back, as he managed to finish 9th in the Tour of the Basque Country, plus even 5th in the Bayern Rundfahrt, where he was 2nd on stage 2, only 8 seconds behind Matthias Frank. For the Tour de France that year, Pinot was quietly confident, and it was a tour that saw bad luck for many of the favourites, including Chris Froome and Alberto Contador, who both had to abandon. But on the 10th stage, up the Planche de Belfi, a few kilometers from his native native village, Pinot managed to battle his way to second on the stage behind the race winner Vincenzo Nibali. Pinot throughout the Tour rode consistently in the mountains, and on the Hautacam stage he even managed to finish second once again to Nibali. And the individual time trial, Pinot was strong and managed to hold on to his third place. This Tour de France really was a revelation for the youngster. He showed that he was one of the best climbers in the world, and he proved that he could compete with the very best. He also won the hearts of many fans across the world for his attacking flair and racing mentality. Pinot returned to the Vuelta once again, this time going for a stage win. However, Pinot was adversely affected by the intense heat prevailing in the first few days. Unable to recover, he decided to call it quits on stage 11. In 2015, Pinot had a strong spring season with a 4th place in Tirreno Adriatico, and at the Criterium International he managed to finish 4th in the time trial, 3rd on the final stage, and thereby finishing 2nd in the general classification behind Jean-Christophe Perrault once again. Pinot continued the good form and won a mountain stage in the Tour de Romandie, and overall he was 4th. The last test before the Tour de France was the Tour de Suisse, and he really showed himself here with some great form, winning on the only high mountain stage, attacking 2 kilometers from the finish, taking over the race leader's jersey, which he was able to hold until the final time trial, where he lost out to Simon Spilak and ultimately finished 4th. At the Tour de France that year, despite a good first time trial, he lost a lot of time in the first part of the tour. He suffered a puncture and a derailment on the cobble stage, and he finished more than 6 minutes down on Chris Froome at the La Pierre Saint-Martin. Subsequently, Pinot decided to go for breakaways, and he came close into Mende. Bardet had attacked but decided to work together with Pinot, but ultimately Steve Cummings came back, and in the final kilometer he managed to take the win. Pinot was not done with the Tour de France, as he managed on the final mountain stage up the Alpe d'Huez to get in the breakaway from the gun, and the breakaway lasted all the way to the finish, and Pinot won the mythical stage itself. Pinot finished the Tour de France in 16th place, and not where he would have wanted. Later, before his final objective, he finished 4th in Milan-Turin, and in Il Lombardia, Vincenzo Nibali attacked several times on the climb, which Pinot and several other riders responded to. Then Nibali managed to get a gap on the descent and won by himself in Como. Pinot, despite the win going up the road, did manage to finish 3rd and obtained the first podium for a Frenchman in the race since 1997, where Laurent Jalabert took the win. The next year, in 2016, Pinot began at the Étoile de Bessèges, finishing 3rd overall after an impressive 2nd place in the time trial, where he was only beaten by the French champion Jérôme Coppel. And during Tirreno Adriatico, Pinot was once again up there, finishing 5th overall, and this race was even marked by the bizarre cancellation of the most favourable stage for the climbers. A week later, at the Criterium International, was back for more, as he won the time trial on the first day, and on the next stage he won the mid-mountain stage and thereby took the overall. In the Tour de France, he again lost a lot of time in the general classification by the end of the first week. Therefore, he went on to dedicate himself to the mountains classification, but ultimately he had to retire at the end of the 13th stage due to bronchitis. In 2017, Pinot announced during the winter season that for the first time in his career he would be targeting the Giro d'Italia rather than the Tour de France. His build-up to the Giro was strong, as at the Vuelta a Andalusia, Pinot managed to win a stage in front of Alberto Contador, and Pinot was also strong at Strade Bianche, where he even managed to finish 9th. And at the Tirreno Adriatico, he was very strong, managing to place himself on the podium after riding consistently throughout the race. And the final test before the Giro, the Tour of the Alps, he managed to win on stage 5, and overall he finished 2nd, 7 seconds behind Geraint Thomas. At Pinot's first Giro d'Italia, he started the race well, as on the first big mountain stage, the blockhouse stage, Pinot was very offensive throughout the stage, but was not able to follow the eventual winner of Nairo Quintana. In the final week, Pinot was in the mix for most of the stages, even finishing 3rd on stage 18 behind TJ Van Garderen and Landa, but the magical moment came on stage 20, 19 kilometers from the finish, where Pinot was instrumental to drive a GC group, and there he managed to win from a select group and take a stage win in front of Ilno Sakharin, remember him, and ultimately Pinot finished 4th overall in his first ever Giro d'Italia, only 37 seconds off the podium. Pinot decided to go to the Tour de France after this, where unfortunately he was never really in contention. Then after this, notably during the Tour de l'Ain, Pinot was strong and even helped his teammate David Gaudu to take a stage on the Queen stage, leading into Onyx, and thereby took the general classification, thus marking his first stage race win of the year. In his final race of the season, it was Il Lombardia once again, and Pinot was in the race winning move but was left behind by Vincenzo Nibali and ultimately finished 5th. 2018, Pinot opted once again to go to the Giro d'Italia, citing that the pressure was far less on him than at the Tour, and his preparations were good and he was very strong at the Tour of Alps, once again winning the overall after riding very consistent on all the stages. At the Giro, Pinot showed his form early on, finishing 3rd up Mount Etna and 3rd on stage 8 before missing out on the stage win on stage 9, only to Simon Yates, who was absolutely on fire that year. Pinot was strong in the final week, even finishing 3rd on the stage where Froome exploded the GC. However, during the 20th stage of the Giro, Pinot seemed to implode and lost 45 minutes, finishing in the Gruppetto, and he decided not to start the last stage, suffering from the beginnings of pneumonia. Pinot made his return to professional racing at the Tour of Poland, where he managed once again to finish 2nd to Simon Yates, but overall he finished 3rd. At the Vuelta, Pinot showed his form was strong as he won the 15th stage up to Lagos Covadonga from a late attack, and also he went on to win the 19th stage to Andorra with an even later attack 200 meters from the finish, beating out Simon Yates this time and ultimately finishing 6th. For the World Championships in Innsbruck, he was part of a formidable French team, but despite their efforts on the last climb, were not able to get rid of Alejandro Valverde, who managed to win the World Championships, and Pinot finished 9th. Pinot went back to the Italian one-day races at the end of the season. Here he finished 5th in the Giro d'Emilia, 2nd in Trevali, and the next day he won from a solo attack the Milan-Turin Classic. And at that year's Il Lombardia, Pinot was in the leading group. Pinot distanced Vincenzo Nibali, the defending champion, and he was the last rider alongside Pinot. That meant that he was able to get clear and eventually won solo in Como, a historic day for the French star. It was his first monument and the biggest one in his career to date, and showed he was even capable of winning the biggest one-day races in the world. For the 2019 season, Pinot began the year with a 4th place in the Tour de la Provence, then the overall at the Haute-Var, and he took 5th place at Treno Adriatico, finishing 5th on the Queen stage. Another strong performance from the Frenchman. After taking a brief break, he returned to competition at the end of May at the Tour de l'Ain, where he took a solo victory on the slopes of the Grand Colombier, which allowed him to win the final general classification as well. Before the Tour de France, he had a strong performance at the Dauphiné, where he managed to finish 5th overall, and his form was good. His Groupama team started the race with a good time trial in Brussels on the team time trial, and during the 8th stage, Pinot looked strong as he followed an attack from Julien Philippe. They dropped all the favorites and both recovered precious seconds in the general classification, finishing behind the stage victor of the day, Thomas de Gendt. Alaphilippe regained the possession of the yellow jersey, and Pinot moved up to 3rd place in the GC. 2 days later, Pinot lost a bit of his lead by an attack initiated by Alaphilippe, and at the finish he conceded 1 minute and 40 seconds on the first group where the favorites were, moving down to 11th place overall. Before the race tackled the Pyrenean stages, Pinot performed well in the time trial in Po and moving himself up into 7th. The next day, thanks to the collective work of his team, and in particular David Gaudu, Thibaut Pinot managed to defeat all the favorites and take an incredible victory on the Col de Tourmalet, beating out the likes of the yellow jersey Julien Philippe, and that returned him to 6th place in the general classification. The following day in Foix, Pinot looked imperious and dropped the defending champion Geraint Thomas and distanced the other rivals one by one, eventually getting rid of the young Colombian Egan Bernal as well, who had briefly followed him, and Pinot continued this momentum and finished this stage in second place, only being beaten out by Simon Yates once again. Pinot had moved himself up into fourth place, only 3 seconds behind Steven Kruijswijk and 15 seconds behind Geraint Thomas, and 1 minute and 50 down on Julien Philippe. Pinot was in a prime position to try and win the Tour de France, but his fortunes were about to change. On stage 19, Pinot heartbreakingly was forced to abandon from a muscular injury contracted 2 days earlier, and this was extremely emotional for Thibaut Pinot, and the dream was gone. Later, Pinot said it was the biggest slap in the face of his career, and to forget that he would have to win the Tour de France. Pinot's retirement from the Tour was a massive disappointment, not only for him but also for the fans who had been hoping to see the first Frenchman win since Bernard Hinault back in 1985. Sadly, Pinot never quite reached the same heights as he did in this Tour. In the 2020 season, Pinot began with the French stage races and managed to finish 5th overall at Paris-Nice. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, the season was paused, and upon the return for competition, Pinot seemed to be one of the favourites for the Tour de France. Leading up to the Tour at the Route d'Occitanie, Pinot finished 4th overall behind Egan Bernal, and in his build-up to the Tour, he was even at the Criterium du Dauphiné, where he was second placed in GC behind Primož Roglič at the end of the second stage. A few days later, Pinot hit the ground and tasted tarmac, and the same fate happened to Primož Roglič, who crashed out the day before. Pinot was the virtual leader on the road from the start. As the attack started, Pinot got off to a good start, but despite the efforts of his teammate Reichenbach, it was a more weakened Pinot from that earlier crash, and thus a small group managed to slip up the road, and eventually Dani Martinez took their overall, and Pinot finished second in the general classification. And at the Tour, Pinot's ambitions were quickly evaporated, as on the first rainy stage in Nice, the weather conditions really hampered the whole peloton, and Pinot was involved in a crash towards the finish, and that really hampered the rest of his Tour. However, he was spurred on by the final time trial, which was in the Vosges region, and he wanted to be there. By stage 8, up to the Porte de Balais, it was quite clear that he was no longer in contention for the GC, as the pain well and truly bothered him. He did make it all the way to the La Planche de Belleville stage and finished 19th, so not a bad run considering the circumstance. In 2021, after poor form in the early races, as he had insufficiently recovered from back pain following his fall during the 2020 Tour de France, he decided not to participate in the Giro or any other races, wanting to focus on his recovery. And later in that season, he returned to competition in the Tour de Limousin with the aim of preparing for his new target, the Italian Classics, at the end of the year. He was 5th in the Coppa Bernocchi. However, at Milan-Turin, he was so fatigued that he gave up 5 kilometers from the finish, citing it was pure fatigue. And at the Il Lombardia, he wasn't quite on form. During the presentation of the 2022 season of the Groupama FDJ team, Pinot announced that he would be the co-leader of the Tour de France team that year with David Gaudu. Pinot began the season with the GP Marseille, where he finished 37th, and at the Étoile des Bessèges, he managed to finish 11th. After a difficult period, Pinot reassured himself by finishing 8th in Tirreno Adriatico, and during the Tour of the Alps, he had a rough start, but during the last stage, Pinot outkicked David de la Cruz in a sprint and took the stage win. Before the Tour de France, he even managed to take a stage win at the Tour de Suisse as well, but for the Tour, his goal was clear. It was a stage victory and help David Gaudu, and the victory especially on La Planche de Belleville if possible. He was up there in a few breakaways, and on the 9th stage he finished 4th, 40 seconds behind the winner of Bob Jungels, and was awarded the most combative rider on the day. Ultimately, he finished in 15th overall in GC, but David Gaudu did manage to finish in 4th. In the 2023 season, Pinot announced that it would be his final year in professional cycling. The season began for him at Étoile des Bessèges, sealing a 6th place overall before he went to Tirreno Adriatico, showing good form by finishing 10th. Pinot almost won the Tour du Jura, finishing 1st in the chasing group to Kevin Vauquelin, and in the Tour de Doupe, Pinot narrowly missed out to Jesus Herrada. At the Tour of Romandy, he was in the final selection on the Queen's stage, but could not respond